Thank you for joining today's webinar, Managing the Customer Experience in a Time of Crisis. We have a large audience logging in, so first of all, thank you for your patience as we were giving everybody time to do so, but also thank you for your attendance. We certainly appreciate it in what is certainly uncharted times. My name is Stacy Bolger, and I am the Vice President of Employee Experience at MaritzCX and InMoment Company. I will be serving as your moderator today. With me on the line, however, are the more important people today, and they are 5 of our top CX experts who will be answering many of the questions our clients have been asking us about managing their own CX programs in today's unprecedented environment. I will be introducing each of our presenters more formally in just a minute. But before we get started, there's a couple things we want to talk about. First of all, is this webinar being recorded? That answer is yes. This webcast is being recorded and you will receive a link to the presentation within the next 24 hours. Secondly, of course, but equally important, will there be a Q&A period? Absolutely yes. We are planning to have time for questions and answers after our presenters conclude their formal presentation. If you have a question, however, during the presentation, just feel free to type it into the question box on your screen, and we'll get to as many of those submitted questions as we can during this period. The webinar was designed, the agenda was designed around the various categories of questions, as I've mentioned, we've already received from our clients. We'll start out discussing whether you should be making changes to your program during this time, and if so, what considerations you should be keeping in mind. We've received a lot of questions about this topic. Then we'll move on to the topic of communicating and adjusting to meet the changing needs of your customers during this crisis. Next, we'll look at employee engagement and discuss how to keep your employees safe, empowered, and motivated. And finally, we'll talk about the all-important task of keeping your customers in the forefront of your business during this time. From here, as I mentioned, we'll go into Q&A, where our panel of experts will be happy to answer any questions you might have. And as I mentioned before, no doubt, we anticipate several. As many of you know, InMoment and MaritzCX joined forces at the beginning of the month. And I'm speaking both on behalf of the organization, but also personally myself, we are very, very excited about our future and what that means to both our customers as well as the industry. But one of the major benefits of these two organizations coming together is that we've doubled our expertise. And I'm pretty honored today to be the one to introduce today's panel, comprised of experts from both MaritzCX and InMoment Company and InMoment. So with that, let's meet our experts and then we'll get the ball rolling. Eric Smuda will be kicking us off today, and Eric serves as Principal, CX Strategy and Enablement. He has over 20 years experience working with major organizations across many industries, helping them establish VOC, CX, and NPS programs. Next is Dr. Dave Ensing. Dave is Vice President, Research Consulting, and he too has over 20 years of CX program experience, mostly in the automotive, or what we now call the mobility sector. He is an expert in providing research design consultation to clients, and he facilitates continuous improvement of existing client studies. Jim Katzman is Principal, CX Strategy and Enablement, and he has been leading and designing CX programs for the last 13 years. His expertise includes roles focused on leveraging CX tools and processes to drive continuous improvement and corporate-wide CX-centered culture initiatives. Funda Whitaker is Senior Director of Insights. In this capacity, she leads research design and best practices for clients from diverse industries. She also has over 20 years of experience in market research and CX measurement. And finally, Dr. Dan Hickey. Dan is a Senior Research Manager serving clients within the financial services industry. He oversees all aspects of research design, data analysis, and reporting. He has over 30 years of experience in financial services. Because this is such a critical time for all of us in the CX and EX space, you can see we've brought our collective firepower and years of expertise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric to start us off. Eric.
Great, thank you, Stacy. Yeah, so as you said, these are certainly interesting times that we're living in, and they're changing every day, every hour, maybe even. And so we wanted to start this afternoon, this morning, wherever you may be listening, with just a conversation around what should you be doing as CX professionals, and what changes or things should you be considering during these interesting times in your program. First, I can't emphasize this enough. Keep listening. Don't turn off your programs. Don't change we'll talk about survey changes. Dave will talk about that here in a minute potentially, but don't turn your programs off. Keep listening. This is when customers are emotionally needy, are sharing things that are important to them. And so it's an opportunity to listen deeper and dig a little bit deeper, both positively and negatively. For those of you that run distributed enterprises with lots of frontline employees, you're going to find wonderful stories, great positive stories. Use those internally. Use those to reward and recognize people internally. Use them to boost morale of your frontline employees, or being asked to step up to another level during these interesting times. But also dig into your open-ended comments and look for the new ideas for the future. If you're a restaurant right now and your world just got turned upside down, you're doing 100% delivery or drive-through only. What can you learn about those operations in your open ends and in your surveys today? If you're a retail organization and you've decided to shut down for the next 2 weeks or 2 months or whatever it might be, how can you dig into your open ends and learn more about store design or traffic flow through the stores or new product opportunities? So there's lots of things in there that you might be able to learn when, we dig a little bit deeper when we have some time and we're not living the day-to-day anxiety or the rush of our day-to-day lives. Verbal and visual reassurance, and you see a lot of talk out there right now. We've all gotten hundreds of emails in the last week from companies saying, here's what we're doing to ensure that you don't catch COVID-19. Great, but I need to see that, right? So I'll give you 2 examples from my life in the last 3 days. I went to Costco this weekend, and who can resist a Costco hot dog at the prices they charge? They had hired somebody to literally stand in the restaurant area, clean the counter after every person went past it, clean the table after everybody stood up and left. Visual reassurance that, hey, Costco's doing something and they care about their customers and are trying to keep people safe. I went grocery shopping this weekend at Publix. I live in Florida and I'm blessed to have Publix here. As you walk to the front of the store, there's a person to greet you who personally washes the cart, wipes the cart for you clean before he hands you the cart. And so, here are just 2 examples. I'm sure there's many out there of companies giving you visual reassurance, that they care about you as a customer and they're doing everything they can to protect you. So it's not just about reading about it, it's actually seeing it and experiencing it. Third thought here, deep dive analysis on special topics. I talked a little bit about understanding your drive-through operations if you're a restaurant, understanding store design. Here's a time when many of us are working at home. Maybe our meeting schedule isn't the same. Our travel schedules are certainly not the same. So how can you do some deep dive analysis on special topics and really think about what the customer experience should be, or what does the customer experience of the future look like? And that really transitions to my next point. We will come out of this at some point. It might be 2 months from now, it might be 6 months from now, we don't know. How do you want your customer experience to change in the future? Now's the time to think about those changes. Now's the time to think about what you want that to be in the future. So yes, there's fear out there. Yes, there's panic out there. Here's also an opportunity. I was just reading a Harvard Business Review study this morning that's looked at the companies that do better coming out of difficult times or coming out of recessions are the companies that hunker down right now and cut costs, but focus their cost cutting on driving efficiency. So it's not about employees, it's about how can I drive more efficient operations, but they're also the companies that invest in new opportunities, new markets, new experiences. Those are the companies that win coming out of these situations. They drive market share increases and they drive better stock prices. So spend your time right now thinking about what new things can we be doing as we come out of the tunnel on this on the other side. With that, let me turn it over to my partner, Dave Ensing, and let him talk more about how to make changes in your CX measurement programs.
Thanks, Eric. Let me see if the slides will advance. There we go. This is Dave Ensing. I'm going to address probably the biggest question on people's minds, which is, should I suspend all or some of my CX measurement program? I think Eric already answered part of that. You really don't want to suspend all of your program. It's a time of crisis, and that's when you really want to hear from your customers, from them. However, there are parts of your program that you might think about suspending. So we'll talk about that in a second. First, I wanted to tell you my biggest piece of advice on this, which is don't do anything drastic without really thinking it through. I saw that on last Sunday, there was a good article published in the online version of Harvard Business Review. It was by a psychologist and marketing professor at the University of Texas in Austin named Art Markman. And he stated that our brains are wired to respond to threats by doing something. However, decisions made during times of threats are often poor decisions in the long run. Therefore, he says, and I'm quoting now, any decision to act should be based on deliberation, sober reflection on data, and discuss with experts, not in reaction to a headline or a tweet. And I think that's really important. So just be considerate, be deliberate, don't make rash decisions. Now, with that in mind, what sort of things should you consider when deliberating on whether or not to suspend your program, or parts of your program, I should say? First is geography. As of now, lots of people are being affected by our reactions to the crisis, but few are really directly affected by things like high rates of disease. If it does occur, you might want to suspend your program in areas that are hard hit. And that's very similar to what we've done before with natural disasters like hurricanes or earthquakes. Another factor to consider is the type of survey. Most programs are transaction-based. That means that the survey is triggered based off of some customer doing a transaction with your company. And those programs should probably go on because customers are engaging with your business, and this is a really important time to hear from people who are engaging with your business. Now, you might, if you're worried about overtaxing people or being annoying to people, you might think about suspending time-based surveys like relationship surveys that are sent out on a service anniversary or something like that, because the customer didn't do anything to trigger that. But one way to assess if you're really being intrusive there is to just look at your response rates. So if your response rates drop significantly, that might be a sign that you're being too intrusive and you should suspend the program. If they stay up, it's probably good to go. Another thing to think about is the survey method. So speaking of intrusiveness, generally telephone calls are more intrusive than emails, so you might consider reducing the phone portion of your program. However, again, I'd let response rates be my guide. I have seen some anecdotal evidence from our phone centers that right now response rates are going up some, and that's probably because people are easier to reach and maybe they're looking for something to do. We also have what industry you're in. As you know, some industries have been really hard hit and really affected by this crisis, others not so much. But maybe a little bit counterintuitively, if your business is really hard hit and is really affected by this crisis, you might want to keep surveying because this is the time that you need to hear from those customers and to see if you're serving them well or not. And then finally, think about your call attempts if you have a phone program, or your email reminders if you have an email program. And you might think about reducing those some because I've seen some call programs that have 5 or 7 attempts, and really the marginal gain of those attempts after 3 or so is very little, and that can be annoying. So you might reduce the number of call attempts. Same thing with email reminders that you probably don't need 2 or 3 email reminders. Probably 1 is sufficient. So with that in mind, those are some things that you can think about. Now I'll turn it over to Jim to talk about communicating with customers during this time.
So thank you, Dave. Let me advance the slide here. So, Dave did a great job of sort of talking about the program and frequency and things like that. I'm going to take it to a little bit more of a detail, specifically around transactional surveys. I'm not going to spend as much time on relationship surveys. As a couple of the speakers have said, we've heard from tons of clients who are trying to decide whether to keep sending transactional surveys to the customers at this time. And like Dave and Eric, you're going to hear it consistently, I think, from all of the panelists. I believe we should definitely continue listening. But there are definitely some things that we should take into consideration and consider. Yes, customers are definitely being bombarded with communications from pretty much everyone. I don't think I realized how many loyalty programs I had signed up for until I started getting 10+ emails every day from every restaurant, airline, bank, hotel, retailer that I've ever been to or done business with in my entire adult career. But business is still happening, and I think that, albeit in a very different way. Who would have imagined just a couple weeks ago where we would literally stop going to restaurants, stop going to the malls, and that all of our kids would be online educating? But this is where we are, and customers are still transacting with us to the extent that they can in different ways. So there are many cliches that we can do at this time, but I'm going to choose just one, and that's to really think about empathy. Customers are confused. There's so much information overload right now. And with all of us being landlocked in our homes, we can't avoid the information. We can't avoid being overwhelmed by it. We want customers to continue to have confidence that they will be taken care of and that we will continue to and that we will all get through this together. So as we think about the actual communication, really brass tacks tactical, in terms of what we're suggesting as far as reaching out, we do think that we should keep listening, but we also think that it's time to modify our survey invitation to acknowledge the current situation. Pretending that it's business as usual just won't really work at this point. Be sure to thank your customers for their continued business. And please, please, please don't use your listening program as an opportunity to sell. Our marketing teams are awesome, and they're being very thoughtful with how they message the ability to transact with us in this new environment. Let the selling and the selling messages stay with them. Remind our customers that their feedback for us about how they transact is super, super vital for us as we think about driving innovation, as we think about driving frictionless experiences. The more we can learn from our customers, the better, but we need to make sure that we explain it to them. So as we were preparing for this session, my fellow panelists and I worked to develop what we think is a sample modified survey invitation that you could use at this time. And we will send this out following the webinar. And but I'm going to read it here, and I'll read it slow just so you can digest it, but we will send it. Here's what we propose. Our world is in the midst of uncharted disruption, and we thank you for your loyalty and support. During this time, your voice is even more important and critical for us to hear so that we can provide the best possible customer experience to you. We truly appreciate your taking a few minutes to provide your feedback. It's simple, it's short, it progresses empathy, it explains the call to action as to why we're asking, and it really thanks customers for being supportive. But of course, each business does need to evaluate their current situation as they navigate these next weeks and months. And so to that extent, there will still be companies that make the decision to stop. But we believe that the feedback we get from our customers is so vital, we absolutely need to keep listening. Linda, do you want to take it from here?
Linda, you may still be on mute.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you, Jim, and thank you, Dave. So in the topic of how we communicate with our customers in this difficult time through the customer experience measurement surveys, one other suggestion is that we can use the survey to communicate about our efforts to our customers. Eric and Jim already mentioned that, we are receiving a lot of emails from every different company that we're interacting with, telling us different stages of their processes and how they care and what they're doing. And while, we might be receiving too many of them and some of it might be a little bit redundant, I believe at least at the beginning or with certain certain emails, everybody feels a little bit more confident, especially if this is a company that you're interacting more frequently, or that some employees there. You feel confident and more comfortable that this company cares about their customers, their employees, and their communities, and they're doing things to either prevent further, disaster, or to help the communities to handle the situation or recover from it. So one way of doing this in our surveys would be to prevent or provide to these customers a path where they can find more information about what you're doing in your business. I've seen in several websites, on the main website of a company, toward the bottom or at the very top, there's a little text, little banner that says, "We care about you. Here is more information about how we're, dealing with COVID-19 or what we're doing for our employees and customers and communities." So it's as simple as that. On the thank you page of our survey, we can have a messaging like the one that we're showing on the screen, just to say, because we care about you, if you want to find out more information about our processes, you can click on this link, and that link can take them to your website, to that specific page where they can read more about what you're doing within your company to help with the situation. Now, Dan and I are going to talk about a couple of other things that you can do with your existing customer experience surveys to leverage these surveys to listen to your customers better, to understand their needs and expectations better. The first suggestion is around open ends. We realize that the open ends we have in our surveys are a great gold mine. I mean, they usually provide great information, great insights to really understand what customers have in mind, what specific issues they have in mind, or what are they dealing with in this experience. So one thing you can do is leverage your existing open-end question and add to your text analytics taxonomy specific keywords or themes related to coronavirus or illness and things related to that matter, so that your text analytics can capture these comments separately, and you can hone in on these comments, read these comments, and do analyses with it to better understand what's bothering your customers, what's keeping them up at night, what's worrying them all day long, what did they expect from you as they interacted with you because of this issue. So definitely adding this category into your text analytics will help a lot to better understand your customer situation and help them. The other idea related to open ends is that you can also add probing. So in your open end question in the survey, you can add keywords to the system, such as corona or virus or things to that nature. And when the customer is typing their comment, if they mention one of those keywords, you can have a quick pop-up come up and ask, "I hear that you're concerned about this situation. Please tell us a little bit more about it," so that the customer can elaborate further on that, and that open-end verbatim that you get will be even richer. In addition to that, definitely there could be other questions to be added to the survey. In your survey, you can use your real estate in a very effective way, especially if you have some additional questions that might not be as critical or essential at the moment, that you can rotate those out and rotate in some specific questions related to this particular issue, this particular concern. And again, if you already don't have an open-end question in your survey, that will be a great starting point. Dan, do you have any other examples that you would like to provide related to what other questions people might consider adding to their surveys in this time?
Sure. Thank you, Funda. So using the open end as a starting point is a great idea in that it does two things for us. One is it gives a free form so that people can raise issues that we weren't necessarily thinking of. It also adds color and context. But we do want to be sure that we're adding at least a couple of closed-ended questions so that we can track how we're doing. A basic rating of just how well we are responding as a company to this pandemic is a good starting point. And again, you can have a follow-up open end that asks what could be done more or what they like in particular about what we are doing. And then, as Jim alluded to earlier, we're already seeing so much communication that we are risking being overloaded. So getting something about how we're doing and getting the communication right, even just a too little, just about right, too much, so that we can gauge our communications and adjust them appropriately. So at the very least, most companies could use those basic kinds of closed-ended questions to complement their open-end. And as Linda said, they're not really adding to the timing. And people are looking for this. They're expecting us to respond. Now, the other thing we want to be prepared for is that change is the new normal, not only for our businesses, but for our measurement. So we should expect that we could start to see some dramatic changes in trend, and that's okay. That's to be expected, and some of it is accurately reflecting the conditions we're dealing with. So there are going to be disruptions. There are going to be problems. If we're looking for a quick rule of thumb, you might want to just be looking at your history as you look at the results that you're getting in this environment. If you've experienced a rating before or a drop like this before, then it's probably not related to the virus. It's part of your normal fluctuation in your history. If you see something that goes out of your normal history, that could well be related to the virus, and you want to get more information. By the way, for people who have trimmed their surveys back drastically to 2 or 3 questions, now might actually be a good time to add some back in. Dave, who just spoke a few minutes ago, did a great review of studies across industries that we've been running and found that there's actually diminishing returns for completions by trimming surveys to under 5 minutes. So we want to be respectful of people's time, but at the same time, we do want to get enough information. And you want to be able to track both improvements in areas that have been disrupted, as well as things that you should be able to maintain. So if you're a grocery store, you know that you're probably going to get declines in an item like finding everything I want, because they're not. But associate courtesy should still be able to remain high. So you want to be able to track both of those things. As you're able to adjust, you should hopefully see improvements back on your trends for something like keeping your shelf stocked. But you also want to make sure that the things that you can maintain and control, you have measurement for. So don't trim surveys back more. And if you have trimmed them a lot, maybe add something back in again. I also just want to add a little side note that there's literally decades of research that shows the impact of apologies and explanations on improving satisfaction when customers encounter problems. And all of our industries, no matter what you're doing, are probably going to experience some problems over the next coming months. So even if you're not measuring in the surveys, and it is a good idea to measure them, but even if you're not, they should become part of business as usual if they aren't already. Encouraging apologies, providing your frontline with as much information to give explanations to customers is really going to help in this environment. Then finally, what we want to be thinking about is that for many companies, 1 or 2 questions around the virus and our response to it should be sufficient. But there are going to be cases of industries that either directly, obviously things like health insurance, healthcare, are going to be much more impacted, but so too are some that are more indirectly. And this can often be the case in B2B, where your business clients are dependent on you. So what are the things that you want to be especially careful about measuring there? First, they're going to be interested in your contingency plans because they want to be sure that you can still deliver to them so they can deliver. So you want to get some assessment of how well you're doing at that. And then you also want to find out what their priorities are so that you can respond appropriately. As mentioned, I've been 30 years in financial services. So if you are small business banking, commercial banking, asset management, you are literally involved in the financial lifeblood of your clients' businesses, and that is all being disrupted. What are their priorities? You want to be able to get out as quickly to be proactive as well as reactive. And in these cases, you may even in some cases want to do a separate survey just around the response to the pandemic and how it's impacting your clients' businesses. There'll be fewer examples of that in the consumer space, but if you take something like investment, where the market is going wild, again, you may even want to go as far as having a separate survey that really is gauging how well you as a firm and your staff are responding to what you're delivering to your customers, which is being greatly impacted by what's going on. So we want to do that balancing act. We don't want to over survey or make this the only thing we're asking customers about, but at the same time, the more that what we're delivering to customers is being disrupted or affects how they're living their lives or doing their businesses, the more we want to get the information that we need in order to respond as effectively as we can. Now, in addition to what we're doing with all of our customer programs, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that all of this is built on the employees. Everybody from the front line to the operations to the technology to the staff groups. You can't deliver to customers if you don't have employee engagement, and obviously there is a whole set of challenges for employees just as there are for customers. Now, Jim and I are going to discuss a little bit about employee engagement, and I'm going to turn it over to Jim, who's going to take us through some big picture issues around employee engagement.
Great. Thanks, Dan. So early in this webinar, I shared that I've been receiving a slew of emails from companies across all the service industries, under the sun. And nearly 100% of the communications reference the company's employees and express tremendous concern for their employees, which is great. But as consumers, we may or may not see this in practice, and for employees, it's certainly challenging. You've heard this theme throughout the day. We're in an extremely disrupted environment. There have been comparisons to this being post 9/11, the 2008 recession, but this is really different for a couple of reasons, and the ways to handle employees is different because of that. First, we don't have a roadmap right now to get to the end of this. And so there's no playbook for our managers and leaders on how to manage. Simply saying that this will be okay soon enough will ring hollow to our employees that are facing a rent payment this week, or a recent college grad that's got to start paying their college loans, and they're not even sure they're still going to have employment. And so what can we do as leaders of people? To begin, companies need to really become attuned to the physical and mental well-being of their staff. And while this may be easier said than done, since managers are going through the same pandemic as everybody else, it's a great opportunity for our managers and leaders to flex the leadership and empathy muscles that got them to be managers in the first place. There's two levels of well-being to look out for. Obviously, physically, employees need to get tested, quarantined, etc. But stress and anxiety levels have to be continually assessed as well. And along this line, a bit out of order on the slide, is the fact that all employees need to be thoughtful about how their peers and leaders are feeling. It is absolutely unacceptable for any one of us to make anyone else feel guilty for how they're feeling. While someone may be perfectly content to come into the office, another person may be petrified to leave their rooms at home. And we need to make sure that we're really over-indexing on not making people feel guilty for how they're reacting to this situation. From a business perspective, this is the time to truly drive new levels of empowerment for customer-facing employees. I've spent a lot of time in call centers throughout my career. I've been doing customer service-related activities for 20-plus years. If I had $1 for every time that I was told that our employees were empowered to do what's best for our customers when they really weren't, I'd be retired. I wouldn't be on this webinar now. So this is really the time to truly empower employees to do the right thing. and not necessarily the rule thing and not necessarily the rigid guidelines that we've always followed. We were talking about this earlier this week. This is the time to try out those new processes and see if they work and see if it creates less friction and see if it simplifies the message, the customer experience for our customers. Finally, with all that is going on, it's really time to relax on driving incentive-laden behaviors, at least for a little while, so that our employees can concentrate on their own well-being and our customers. By removing the stress of metrics, our employees will be able to focus on delivering a great customer experience to our customers. And really right now, that's what we all need. With that, I will turn it back to Dan.
Thank you. So I'm going to walk us through a few ideas around how to approach these times with your employees. And the first thing is really to start at the high level. And really, Jim already covered this. So you want to address the elephant in the room. What are their fears and concerns? And make sure that you are communicating, that you're hearing it, you're addressing it, and it matters. So you want to just do that initial level setting. Then you want to take it a level down. Now you want to communicate exactly what you're doing. And here you want to keep a few simple rules in mind. First is be as transparent as you possibly can. If you don't have an answer, say so. But don't leave them wondering whether you even know about it, whether it's being addressed. Be as transparent as you can. Recognize that communication for employees as well as for customers is already becoming overwhelming. So try to do your communications in relatively shorter bursts, less dense communications, get to the point. Make sure you're highlighting what's important, and also prioritize your communications to what are the most pressing issues for your employees. So get those to the top, get those over communicated so they know the message about those. So again, you just really want to be sure that you're emphasizing getting as much information as transparently, as timely as you possibly can. The final piece is that we just want to also be sure that the communication is going in both directions. Now, by the way, this is a best practice in normal times, but it becomes hyper important in these times. We want to be sure that the communication is going in both directions, not just that management is effectively communicating their response, but also that they're listening to what's bubbling up from the organization. What are the new issues that people are facing, or how are these unintended consequences of what management has decided to do in response? We need to have these things going in both directions. And how you do it is less important than the fact that you do it. Surveys are great, town halls, chats, whatever works for your organization. And this is one of those cases where more is more. The more channels you have open, the better off you are. So whatever you can handle and manage for that two-way communication, you should keep that in mind, and you should do that. And just one other point to keep in mind is that not only are your employees interested in how you're going to respond to them, but so too are your customers. So you do want to be sure that you are communicating to your customers, especially if you're in a hard-hit industry, what you're doing for your employees. One of the emails that came out from a retailer, it was just informing everybody that the stores are going to be closed for the next 2 weeks to try to contain the spread of the virus, made a point of saying that the sales associates were all being paid their full salary. So that, that reassurance goes to the customers that, I feel better that the store is making these changes, but what happens to the people that depend on the paycheck? Well, they're going to keep getting it. And so what you can do to reassure customers that employees are being taken care of is also critical. And with that, I am going to turn it back over to Eric to give us some wrap-up points.
Great. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. Hopefully, everybody's picked up several good tips here over the course of the last hour. I'm sorry, having a problem with the webinar there. Just want to wrap up today with some final thoughts, and you know, we've just had a good conversation about employees, and obviously we need to take care of employees. As you think back to your CX program, though, right, it's all about putting customers first. Build that emotional connection with them. You know, right now everybody's nervous. There's a lot of fear out there. There's a lot of panic. Engage in a conversation. Treat them as a human being first. Understand their needs, understand their insecurities. They're worried about their personal safety. They're worried about their families. Recognize that before you deal with the business transaction or the financial transaction that's going on in this situation. Secondly, empathize with their financial situation. You know, thankfully we see a lot of companies stepping up right now to waive fees and nuisance charges. A lot of the utility companies have announced that they're not going to disconnect customers right now. Many of the telco and cable companies are giving away free Wi-Fi access with everybody working at home and children now doing school online, you know, airline change fees, those kinds of things. So look at your business and think about how can I empathize with my customers' financial situations? Where are the bad profits? Where are the bad fees and the nuisance fees that we can cut some slack and cut people a break on here? Third, now's not the time for the rule book. You know, Jim talked a little bit about call centers earlier. Look at your policies. Think about how they apply in this case. Empower your frontline employees to make human decisions and deal with the situation in real time and not just quote policy and quote the rules to them. For those of you who are familiar with my friend Jean Bliss, she wrote a book a couple years ago titled, "What Would Your Mother Do?" And I think that's just great advice for all frontline employees and all policymakers right now. What would you do if that was your mother standing in front of you? How would you treat her? And will you treat the customer the same way in this situation? Lastly, let's focus on building lifetime relationships with customers. Yes, we all acknowledge businesses are going to struggle for this quarter, maybe two quarters, depending on how long this lasts. This is not about maximizing this quarter's profit. This is not about maximizing, you know, Q1, Q2, for those of you who are on a calendar quarter. This is about building lifetime relationships with customers. The companies that invest in customers right now, the companies that take care of customers and show that empathy will recover faster. They will be healthier in the medium and the long term. So don't think about today. Think about how can you help a customer today so that it will benefit the company in the long term. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Stacy and open it up for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, Eric, and to all of our panelists. You all distilled a tremendous amount of information in a really condensed period of time. So we have, as you might imagine, had a lot of questions come in, and we are going to jump to try to answer as many of them as we can. I want to note that it's unlikely that we will get to all of them just due to volume and time. So know that if we don't get to your question before our time is up, or it wasn't answered in the presentation itself, which I noted some that came in were, we will be reaching out to you individually with a response to your question. So let's dive right in. And we're actually going to start with a pretty easy one, Jim. I'm going to send it your way. We have a request to reiterate the new introduction to transactional surveys that you rattled off in your earlier portion. Can you please repeat that for folks? And also noting that this will be written down and shared as well after the fact.
Sure, happy to. So here's what we came up with. Our world is in the midst of uncharted disruption, and we thank you for your loyalty and support. During this time, your voice is even more important and critical for us to hear so that we can provide the best possible customer experience to you. We truly appreciate your taking a few minutes to provide your feedback.
Excellent, thank you. Next, we're gonna shift. We've had a couple of questions that have come in regarding executives, and Dan, some of the things that you spoke to about surveying and how to make changes, and we spoke to that a couple of times throughout our presentation. So I will read the question. In one case, we had an individual whose executive team decided to stop surveying, and we're looking for tips and angles to try to convince them to resume surveying. But in addition to that, how can we communicate differently, if at all, to executives about the feedback that we're receiving from customers in our surveys? And Dan, we'll start with you on that one.
Sure. So to take the first one, I think really the points that Dave covered earlier is, especially when we're doing online email surveys, these are not very disruptive. People can ignore them. So if you combine that with the kinds of changes that Jim was talking about in the invitation that acknowledges this, and incorporate questions that are specific to how you're responding, especially the more critical your response is to your customers, the more you want that feedback and the more they want to give it. So I think those are some convincing arguments about why you do want to re-engage with surveys. In terms of the second part about positioning results, I think that it's important to just get them to expect that they can't treat the customer feedback as business as usual any more than they can treat anything else as. There are most likely going to be declines because there are most likely going to be disruptions for literally every kind of business. And so customers are still just being honest. They're telling, which is what we want them to be in the feedback. So we have to accept that our trends are going to be disrupted. That's okay. That's part of getting through this process. So I think setting that stage so that they're not fixated on this is a bigger drop than we've seen in the past. Yes, let's not worry about that. Let's worry about how well we're responding, and let's focus on the areas that we need to address the most. So are they where we expected? Are there some surprises? What's going on in there? So basically set the stage for them to think about it differently.
Hey, Dan, this is Dave. I thought I might add to that a little bit. So I think part of the question was also, how do you convince a CEO or executive level management that it's important to keep surveying or keep a program going? And one of the things that I'd recommend, and this might sound weird from a quant stats guy, is stories are much more powerful than numbers. So if you can find, 5, 10 really good responses that are important, that show the CEO that, if we wouldn't have heard from this customer, we wouldn't have known this, or, this shows how much our efforts are working or not working, something like that, that helps a lot, anecdotal evidence like that.
Excellent. Great addition, Dave. And since I've got you, I've got another question coming your way. You referenced time-based surveys, and the question is, what if it only contains a handful of questions? Is that really especially inconvenient for customers? I think we're looking here to understand the recommendation on whether or not to continue those types of surveys.
Right. So I think the answer to that is pretty quick, is probably it's not a real inconvenience to the customer. It does matter some. Is it a phone survey or is it an email survey? Because a phone one would be a little bit more inconvenient. But generally, I would think, no, that's probably not a big deal, especially where we are right now in this crisis. If things get worse, maybe it does become more so. And so again, I would just keep looking at my response rates and see, and also look at the returns as they come in and see what people are saying, because they'll let you know if they think it's inconvenient. There'll be some people that respond that say that. So that's the way that I'd approach it. I think it brings up another issue, though, which I want to mention, is I didn't want my part to be construed as these things should be eliminated. The things that I talked about geography and time-based surveys versus transaction-based surveys, I was talking about things to consider and deliberately consider, but by no means was I saying you should just eliminate these aspects of your program.
Absolutely. Always a good clarification with the amount of information zooming by us from all fronts these days. Good to be absolutely clear in our message here today. Thank you. So we've had a couple of questions come in regarding the critical importance of frontline employees, such as those in contact or care centers. And for that, I'm going to turn to Jim, who's got just some history in that space. Jim, the first question is, Would you recommend that we acknowledge to our customers that agents are working from home, or would we maybe keep our IVR messaging as it stands?
Yeah, so thanks for the question. I actually thought about it. I'm glad it came in early. I was able to sort of think about it in my mind. I honestly don't think we need to. I think that if asked, we should certainly not deny it, but I don't know that we need to. I think that our customers that are calling us, it's for a transaction, and I think they're just happy to have someone on the other end of the line that is competent and capable to take care of them. I think that if it comes up in conversation, you don't shy away from it, but I don't think that we need to proactively acknowledge.
Excellent. And then the second question there actually just disappeared off my screen. So looks like
I can share it. I can share it.
Oh, can you? Okay, great.
Yeah,
go ahead.
So the question was around transitioning frontline employees to work from home, and what are some things we could think about to do that, to make that easier. I think there's a couple things. Most call centers have a morning check-in when people come on shift, and I think that should continue. There's so much great technology. There's Google Hangouts, there's Slack, there's Zoom, et cetera. So I think that doing that morning check-in is still super critical. And if you haven't already, like I said, most call centers that I've been in, they do have Slack channels for their teams or Google Hangouts. I think that people should continue to use those as a channel for people to communicate and stay connected to each other. The third thing is to continue to make it fun. Anyone that's grown up in a call center and had to wear their pajamas and sing YMCA in a parking lot, we can still do that. We can still wear our jerseys on Jersey Day. In fact, here at InMoment yesterday on one of our Slack channels, people were encouraged to send pictures of their home office. Keep it fun, keep it personal. And the last thing that I would recommend is buy our frontline folks lunch. I think this accomplishes two things. Number one, it makes them feel connected and keeps them fed. Number two, it supports local businesses because they'll be able to do some of the delivery things. So keep them connected. Make sure they feel like they're appreciated and make it as easy and seamless a transition as possible. So those are my tips off the top of my head.
Excellent. Excellent. Thanks, Jim. Definitely a key group of constituents that we need to keep in the forefront of our mind. So I think we have time for one last question, and I will throw it out to the group and see who wants to jump on it. We haven't talked a lot about how businesses are pushing more online than ever. How do we make sure we are measuring the online experience in making interactions with us easier while encouraging social distancing? I think it's a very relevant question given that many of us are trying to encourage social distancing as well as now mandated to work from home.
So I'll take a start at it, and I think there's a couple of things to keep in mind to look at. The first is that we may see some increase in volume, which means there could be some disruptions. So looking at what you're already tracking and the feedback you're getting, and also being as transparent with your customers as possible, that when there are disruptions, here's what's happening, here's how we're responding to it. For the customers that aren't already doing business online, and we're already seeing this from many retailers and banks and everybody else, that offering them advice and tips about how to get online, answering their questions, so that people who didn't do it before because they didn't really feel the need to and prefer the in-person experience, but now may prefer it, make it easy for them to transition. So let me give other people a chance to weigh in here.
If someone is speaking, you're still on mute. Anyone else want to weigh in on the importance or any best practices you're seeing in this space for online interaction and measurement at this point in time?
This is Sundar. I think Dan already covered it well. I mean, one thing to consider is, and even if you have online measurements in place already, what's going to be most helpful is really to understand how customers are trying to reach you through the online channels, through digital channels, and what's working well, what's not working well, what are their challenges, so that you can act on it quickly. And especially since we're talking about technology, and I know it's not that easy to make technological changes within organizations all the time, but you could act on some of that information that you're capturing. So make sure that the questions you have in your survey do capture the effect on the customer's experience based on what they're trying to do at that moment, and especially with the sensitivity and urgency of what they're trying to do because of the current situation.
Absolutely. Thank you, Funda. And you guys, it's killing me here. We have so many great questions that I want to be able to get to, and we just simply don't have the time today. So if we haven't gotten to your question, certainly know that we will respond to you and follow up after this webinar. So given that this is all the time that we have, I want to thank everybody for joining, and I want to thank our panel of experts. Believe it or not, there was a combined experience level of over 100 years on this call today, and those years brought fantastic insights, great examples to a challenge like none of us has seen or experienced before. So to summarize what we've attempted to convey in this session, I'm going to borrow from an exchange that I had with Funda, one of our panelists earlier today, and that is that it's not the time to worry about scores, short-term gains, or even the future loyalty of your customers. Rather, now more than ever, it's the time to reflect on the human side of our business. How are we and the organizations that we support contributing to people and to our communities while weathering this crisis? How are we using the listening posts that we have in place already to truly understand how we can innovatively and proactively both alleviate customer concerns and meet the emerging needs of our customers in this time of unprecedented change? Organizations that make the difference in people's lives right now, those are the ones that will secure the future loyalty of their current customers and also gain new ones. And so the tips and the tricks and the ideas and best practices that were shared today were all intended to help build this broader sense of purpose and focus on our customer needs in this time of change. So before I close out, you'll see I've changed the slide here, and I do want to let you know that if you want more information about how to manage your CX program in this time of crisis, we're offering both this timely point of view written by several of our experts, as well as a blog post that was recently written, again, by a number of our panelists. Just logistically, you can download the paper by going to the resource library on MaritzCX.com. But alternatively, feel free to give us a call or email us at the number or email on the screen, and we'd be happy to send you an electronic copy here. So with that, thank you. By tuning in, you have demonstrated how much you care about your customers and also your employees. So with that, be safe, be well.